So without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce our main speakers for the afternoon. They are David Del Porto and Carol Steinfeld. David is the founder of several companies, including Ecos, the first importer of high-performance, low-flush toilets, Ecotech, a manufacturer of high-capacity composting toilet systems. He also founded Ecological Engineering Group, which for 15 years has designed, engineered, and obtained approvals for a range of ecological wastewater management solutions, including many innovative source separation zero discharge systems that use plants and natural processes to use up all wastewater. David has consulted to Greenpeace and several island governments. He is a member of the NSF Standard 350 Committee for Water Reuse and an adjunct instructor at Harvard University. He co-wrote 2 books on ecological wastewater recycling. And Carol Steinfeld is a writer-researcher who writes about ecological infrastructure solutions and designs programs to promote their implementation. She's the founder of Eco-Vita, which supplies urine diversion components for ecological wastewater systems. She co-authored with David Del Porto 2 books, the Composting Toilet System book and Reusing the Resource, Adventures in Ecological Wastewater Recycling. Both those books are linked on our website, by the way. Profits from book sales funds EcoWaters projects, which conducts workshops, publishes books and construction plans, and presents on ecological alternatives worldwide. Carol wrote the book Liquid Gold, The Lore and Logic of Using Urine to Grow Plants, and you're going to hear all about that very shortly. Her latest book on ecological water management will be released this year. Carol and David's work has helped to change laws and educate the public and regulators about alternatives for better wastewater management. So as you've just heard, these are 2 incredible experts who are generously sharing their knowledge and time with us this afternoon. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Carol and David, and I will hand the floor over to them. Go ahead, David.
And here I am. Well, thank you, everybody, for allowing us into your living room. We're going to be talking about urine, which Carol refers to as liquid gold because of its value. As you can see in this particular slide, we have actually written extensively on the topics and done a lot of work actually implementing them as well. What we're going to be covering today are some topics. Why divert and use urine? What are the constituents of urine? The main ways that we're going to be talking about using it, how to manage it. Now, there's issues with urine. Some of them are pathogens, salts, certain biological issues that need to be dealt with. Now, we're also going to be providing examples of urine diversion in action. The key, however, is it legal? And the answer still is probably not, unless you get some special permits. And then, of course, there are specific resources and how to contact us, sort of the commercials at the end of the program. So the first question is, well, why do it in the first place? Of course, the first component is that if you have a waterless toilet, such as a composting toilet, it provides a management benefit. There's not as much water in it, so the compost is drier, and there's not as much odor. And of course, you don't have to flush the urine away because you've moved it away mechanically. And then it has the most important component, and that is there are macronutrients in it. The nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium, the NPK, as you see on fertilizer packages. It's a very valuable fertilizer, very rich in nitrogen. Now, in normal healthy populations, it's pathogen-free. And If it's combined, unfortunately, in some cases with feces, it's easily sanitized for use. Importantly, though, for surface and groundwater, it diverts these nutrients so that they don't cause damage. For example, if the urine, the nitrogen in urine, grows plants in surface waters and impoundments, then these plants grow like crazy. They decompose, and they use up the oxygen, and that's called eutrophication. So when these nutrients are misplaced, then they're a pollutant. So what are the constituents of urine? We're going to be talking more about this, but from a practical point of view, we're looking at the NPK value. You see that as 11, which is the nitrogen, 1, which is the phosphorus, and 2, which is the potassium, NPK. And these are the kinds of constituents that you're going to be looking for when you use it as fertilizer. Now, where does it come from? It comes primarily from the nitrogen anyway, from the decomposition of larger molecules such as urea and creatine and uric acid, which are excreted in urine as a byproduct of human metabolism. We also have salts. The salt causes trouble. We consume a lot of salt, and it's excreted in urine, and it needs to be managed when we use it for fertilizer. Well, how much is there? Well, on average, it's about 1.4 liters per day, and that's the volume of urine that we have to deal with. So you can see here by this slide, which is kind of neat, that plants that are grown with urine actually grow better, and that's because they're very high in nitrogen. And so we think that nitrogen has a wonderful opportunity to grow food, not only in the developing world, but also here in the developed world, because it avoids pollution and it creates something of value. Now, what do we have to know about it that's important from a pathogen? Pathogens are human diseases that we have to manage. In normal, healthy populations, urine is sterile. In other words, it's pathogen-free. There are exceptions, and you have to know what they are. And basically, if it's contaminated with feces, because feces has most of the bacteria and most of the human pathogens, and it's nice that it's separated. But in some cases, urine also has hepatitis C, and so it has to be managed. Now, how does it work from a deactivation point of view? What we've learned from research in Sweden is that if you contain the urine for 6 months, what basically happens is that the nitrogen compounds break down to ammonia. The ammonia is toxic to human pathogen organisms, and the pH is very low. So the combination of low pH as well as ammonia actually deactivates, if you will, the pathogens. Now, for a family, the way you're using it in a household, 1 month is probably the best thing to deal with. How do we deal with it? Well, from a practical point of view, the nitrogen component, especially some of the uric acid, can be really too high, too hot for most plants. So it's best diluted with water, the rainwater or tap water. And you can do that by simply mixing the two together on a ratio of about 8 parts of water and 1 part of nitrogen. The other alternative is to add it to your compost pile, in which case the nitrogen is matched with the carbon in the leaf litter, and so you have a good carbon-nitrogen ratio, so all the nutrients are then bound up in the compost. That's really a good thing to do. We think that's best. Now, another approach, which is not mentioned here, is combining the urine with gray water. When you combine the two, you have a high-volume, very rich fertilizer value, and it's easy to manage. Now, management of salts is important. We consume a lot of salts, and as a consequence, there's only 2 really good ways to deal with that. If you have soils that allow the rainwater or something to drain through them so that the salts don't accumulate, that's one way. But in my practice, for example, we've found that we could plant certain plants, literally mining the salt. The plants that we use are called excretive halophytes, salt plant-loving plants. And what they do, like saltwater cordgrass or amshot or salt cedar, they literally take up the ions of sodium and chloride and bring them up through the plants, up to the leaves, and excrete them as salt in the leaves. So if you remove the leaves, you've actually removed the salt. Now there's a technical issue. I mean, it's nice that you can collect urine, but you need to have the equipment to do it. And you see here a number of different technologies using ways to do it. The ways that you're seeing in Sweden and increasingly here, besides urinals, is that the toilet itself is divided into two parts. If you look at the slide on the left, we're looking down into the bowl, we see that there's a regular bowl in the back, and that's a flush for feces and toilet paper. But there's this little cup in the front. And the little cup in the front has a hole in it, and when you're sitting down, your urine is expressed into that cup, and it drains away in a separate pipe. So we have these urine diverting toilets, as we call them, and these use a variety of means. Some of them have a small flush mechanism in the top for urine only, and another one for flushing feces, excuse me. So there are also totally waterless systems. Here are some of the ones like the Aqua Clara toilet, and this is a Mexican product, and it basically does the same thing, except the very large part of it in the back allows for a direct drop, into a composter, and the urine is diverted, and there's a bucket of additive that you put in like you would with a composting toilet. And there's also a urinal that sits up at the top that goes into a collecting drum. We've had a number of experience with this eco-dry porcelain toilet from Sweden that has a little urine rinse, and you see that the idea is that fecal matter goes into the back with toilet paper, and urine goes into the front. It's collected and sent in the other direction. So it's diverted. They're really urine diverting toilets, and in this case there are kits that are available so that you can do it yourself. The Privy kit, which is one of them, which basically allows you to build your own urine diverting system, and that is a kit that's available through Eco-Vita. Of course, you can do it yourself with funnels and things like that. It's, of course, inexpensive to do, but you have some management issues, such as what we call skid marks, which is fecal skids on the unit, which is difficult to wash away and unpleasant to deal with. Urinals, of course, we're all familiar with, but the waterless urinals, whether they're plastic, fiberglass, or porcelain, are increasingly popular in the United States, especially in universities, because they can divert the urine and effectively solve a lot of problems. Once again, you can do it yourself, and these are systems that you see on the right which allow you to do that. Now there are containers as well. Any container from a practical point will do. The idea is you collect it in one place and then move it to a place where you're going to use it. These are various jugs that have been created. Carol put her own pee container together for herself. It allows you to, especially a female, to collect the urine in one place and transport it somewhere else. Men, of course, have the opportunity to do that rather directly. We have our own transport system built into our bodies. Now, how to do it? We talked about maybe some of the best uses. Yes, you can mix it with rainwater or just any kind of water. But from a management point of view, if you can separate the gray water, because you have a composting unit or other type of dry toilet, and if you mix the two together, when they are combined, a very small amount of urine creates a carbon-nitrogen ratio of 25. And that's ideal in terms of microbial growth, composting, and the like. So you can grow your plants with impunity. You can increase that if you need more nitrogen. Nitrogen usually makes green things grow, like leaves and shoots. We talked about composting it, and here the idea is you make your composting pile from leaf litter and other scraps, and then you add the urine to it. In this case, you have to mix it yourself. That, of course, gives you very, very good compost, high in nitrogen, because compost often doesn't have a lot of nitrogen in it by itself. So, of course, we can always dilute it, as we talked before, and use it directly on plants. Some plants think it's great, okay? so you can do it directly. So again, we talk about 8 parts of water to 1 part of urine. Good management practice. It's always best not to put it on root crops, because now you're potentially introducing pathogens that are eaten in the root crops. So you have to be careful. And also because of the salt, you might actually change the characteristics of the food that you're eating, sort of pre-salted, if you will. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this over to Carol, and she's going to be talking about individuals and uses. And so I'm at this point going to turn it over to Carol.
Okay, thanks, David. This is Carol. I'll just show 4 or 5 examples of urine diversion for growing plants. You can read many, many more of examples in our books, especially the last ones, Liquid Gold and Reusing the Resource. In this slide, we see Heather Kuiper in Oakland, California. Heather, her 2 kids, and her husband, who's a doctor, use an EcoFlush porcelain urine diverting toilet, which we see here, with its little sign explaining to users how to use it. That's very important, by the way, with urine diverting toilets. Never underestimate how important it is to explain these toilets to users. They won't know. In this case, or at Heather's house, the urine flushes with a little bit of water to the backyard, where it combines with the home's gray water from the kitchen sink, which isn't quite legal in California just yet without a special permit, and the laundry gray water to an eco-cyclic grow-away system where landscape plants grow it away. So that's, I think that points to the future of urine diversion and gray water systems. We'll be skimming off some of these flows from city wastewater treatment plants so that they can work better, have more capacity, use less energy because they're not trying to get rid of nitrogen, and at the same time we're going to have these happy landscapes that are growing away these products that right now we consider management challenges. And there's that system. Now they would like to just have the urine and gray water go right to the lawn in the backyard, but they want to get a permit for this one day and make this formal. So this system is that eco-cyclet, formerly called the recirculating wastewater garden, and it consists of different kinds of substrates, mostly a certain size gravel. It's lined so that, again, any health agent who has to examine and approve this will know that nothing from this is leaving the system. And it's planted with plants that, with the substrate, basically disappear all of that urine and gray water and create this landscape feature. And we have the little girls there to let us all know that there's no odor from that system. This is my friend Conrad in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. His house is right next to a bay, a little cove that's suffering from too much nitrogen from these surrounding septic systems. So he went and did something about it 10 or 20 years ago. He made his own urine diverting toilets. We don't see them here, but what we do see is him standing next to the 55-gallon barrels in which he does that containment for potential pathogens we just heard about. So these collect all the urine from the 2 toilets in the house. After a time, that is combined with, in his case, tap water, goes into soaker hoses to that big garden down below underneath the picture of Conrad in the lower left. And that feeds the entire neighborhood. And on the right, we see Jan, his partner. She's not down in the garden. She's on the roof. He has a rooftop greenhouse where he grows mostly greens all year round. So that is an ecological nitrogen management solution. And this is my East Coast storeroom and office. It's also a solar installer's office. And I like to show this because it's ecological shading too. This is our south-facing front door with its sliders and its solar panels, but we had a problem with getting too hot during the summer. So we took that planter, which is actually a box that a big wind turbine blade arrived in, lined it, and filled it with compost we had made there with urine from the office toilets and leaf litter that people bring to the site, and composted it, and we plant peas and pole beans in that and train them up to the roof. So during the growing months, which also happen to be the hottest months, we have this ecological shading there that also provides us a crop. And this is a system that was in David Del Porto's former house. He just moved to North Carolina. This is outside of Boston. And this shows you how simple one of these little gray water systems can be and how well integrated into the landscape. Most of his neighbors didn't know he had a gray water system, which is what this started as. This is managing all of the gray water from the laundry machine, from the washing machine. And then urine is added to it to improve the performance of the gray water system. So this is much like that first system we saw with the little girls. It's lined because he wanted to get permits for it. And it's a combination, a strata of substrates that work with specially chosen plants that do work year-round, even though this is in a cold place with snow, to use up all of the gray water, and the urine enhances it by powering up the nutrient balance and giving the plants something to eat. Here's another system. This one's in Fiji, and it's used with a composting toilet made of a barrel. I don't show the toilet stool there. It's actually a microflush toilet. This isn't a urine diverting toilet system. This is using up gray water from the guest house at this resort in Fiji, as well as the leachate from the composting toilet, which is made from a microflush toilet and an aerated barrel system composter that David's firm designed for them. And again, this system, the wastewater garden or the eco-cyclet, is basically keeping all of that nutrient-rich liquid from getting into the surrounding coral reef, which is what brings the guests to this resort. A little bit of nitrogen can actually kill off, it really affects coral reefs. So this is a system that, again, illustrates how urine diversion, maybe combined with gray water systems, can be incorporated into the landscape without making without alerting the neighbors or without changing your landscaping plan. These probably aren't plants you're going to grow in Tucson. And this is in Sweden, one of the first systems we visited in the late 90s. This is Gebers, or Gebisch, as you would pronounce it in Sweden. It's outside of Stockholm. It's an old hospital on a lakefront that was converted to kind of like an eco-community. It's pretty mainstream, though. And they use those eco-dry porcelain urine diverting toilets that you saw on an earlier slide. And the urine goes to these tanks in the basement where it hangs out, lets the pathogen deactivation take place using those parameters we just heard about. And periodically, a farmer comes, pumps those out. I think he also has pillow tanks. He collects the urine, has it tested, and then we're missing a slide here, but it is injected into animal fodder crops as almost a free fertilizer. The cost is simply his collection costs. And the feces, the solids, drop to these rollaway barrel composters in the basement. The Swedish version of the Centers for Disease Control partnered with Stockholm Water and some other institutions in the early 2000s and found that measuring these urine to farm practices, that urine could take the place of purchased urea fertilizer, and it was about 90% effective. So that's pretty powerful. And this is kind of a random slide. Here's some photos I found on my computer. These are just some really simple systems that we sometimes make in my workshops. The one to the left looks kind of scruffy, but it's been there for 10 years. This is in a multifamily house in Boston. Some guys said, you know, we want to have a composting toilet. Our landlord won't allow us to remove our flush toilet. And I said, well, why don't we just put it in the basement? That's the no man's land, the common space. where you all can go. So they made this very simple system using the Privy Kit diverter. That's the blue piece. That particular one has a styrofoam seat. You could put a regular seat on it. And inside is a composter, and the urine goes right into that 3-gallon container, which they take outside and pour into their composters. And to the right, you see an old picture of me with a student, and we're making a slightly upscale version of that. You can see what's inside it. That one, we're using a fiberglass urine diverting toilet from Mexico, and that was for a neat eco-lodge in Mexico. That was one of 3 different types of composting toilets we made for El Santuario. And that's a Harvard Public Health School student. Public health schools are very interested in these ecological sanitation practices as a disease transmission intervention. And then down below is a topless version of the barrel toilet we made. And this shows you how you can make a diverter out of a funnel. And some of you are already doing that through the Watershed Management Group program. Here you can see we trimmed them up, and we also hung a net in these systems for more aeration. So again, this is missing the top and the vent stack and the air intake, but that way you could see what's inside. What we found is we would spend half the day getting the funnel just right, and we'd still have skid marks on the funnel, and that's when we started to switch to buying manufactured diverters whenever the budget allows. And maybe David can jump in here. As he was saying, it's not always easy to get legal acceptance, even though the parameters for safe use of urine have been established, at least by the Swedes. We're trying to do that here in the U.S. Urine is still wastewater, and as such, it's going to require a wastewater permit. Nearly no local authority, I'm sure there's an exception somewhere, especially somewhere remote, is going to let you pour it on the ground and just consider the brown stuff your wastewater product. The good news is David's firm has gotten permits for these systems, and about 10 years ago, David got permits for a system or was working toward that end there in Arizona. David, are you online?
I'm not sure that my microphone is my microphone on?
Yes.
Well, how about that? I never shut it off. Yes, permits are tricky, but the idea is that if you persevere and you have a friendly health officer, you can do that. They will probably want to have a demonstration. They may, as we found in many jurisdictions, want to have the product tested. They want to make sure that it's safe before it goes into the public hands, if you will. So a test program, a protocol should be developed, and probably the first one that goes into the community will be carefully monitored, both by the locals people and hopefully yourself. And then you roll it out afterwards. We found that to be true with all, whether it's composting toilets or urine diverting toilets or combinations, which we have permitted. Usually it's the plumbing inspector that needs a lot of education. The next person, of course, is the Board of Health officer. So come armed with a lot of good data, a lot of experience from other jurisdictions. Sweden has wonderful data in terms of urine and urine management. Use that and bring that to the table when you look for approval.
Great. And actually, in that... Tori, Oh, Tori, yes?
Sorry to interrupt. We do have a couple of questions. Do you want to take those now, or shall we wait till the end?
I'm looking at them, and I just have like 2 more quickie slides. So why don't we take them at the end? Does that work?
That sounds great. Thanks.
Okay, I was just going to mention that there in the photo is a urine diverting flush toilet we did get a permit for in Palo Alto. The urine right now is going to the treatment plant, so really it's just an example of water conservation. However, in the future we get the permit for the urine use system on site. Sometimes just getting the permit begins with the fixture itself. Please also, a lot of people will contact me for urine diverters or urine diverting toilets for some big festival or a disaster situation or humanitarian situation for a school with little kids, and I don't always think that's a good idea. And Uno Windblad, one of the first authors on this topic, also discouraged using urine diversion in schools. It's very hard to explain. It's very hard to intercept every user so that they understand how to use the toilet. So it's best to have them where you have some control over who's using them. I actually didn't believe this until I made a bunch of systems for Semana Santa festival on the beach in Mexico and saw how everything can go wrong. So urine diversion, not ideal for every situation. And remember that Pee on Earth Day is June 21st. And June 21st, last year, I was in Phoenix and was able to, in a hotel, so still managed to pee on Earth with the help of a container and a happy palm tree, I hope. So that's a time to focus on this practice and spread the word more than you are now. And resources. There are a lot more resources than there were when we first started our books, but I still find that instead of listing a bunch of references that you'll find in our books, many of which are in your library, the best one is Urine Separation, which was published and updated once or twice in 2000, and that is the Stockholm Water Company working with some institutions to establish some safe use parameters for urine diversion. I just think it's the best written and establishes about all you need to know. For the rest of it, including summaries of many of these studies and lessons learned, often the hard way with dead plants or messy toilets, but also visiting hundreds of systems, including watershed management groups. Check out our books, which you can find Liquid Gold, only $12. You could find at these websites and at your bookstore, and your library may have it. And feel free to email us with any questions or examples of what you're doing, and we'll try to respond. Okay, Tori, thanks.
Great. So thank you so much, both of you. If I can remind you, Carol and David, as we go into the question and answer here, if you are not speaking, to mute your microphone, because otherwise we get a lot of feedback. So just if you're not speaking, mute yourself, and when you do speak, then unmute yourself. So backing up a little bit, the first question was, Carol, back when you were talking about the Fiji system, Brady asks how long that system has been in use.
Actually, David's firm designed that. David, I visited it, but David's firm designed it. Do you remember the year, Dave?
No, I think it was 1997, I believe.
And it's still in use because I called the new owners of the resort 4 months ago, and they're really happy with the system.
Great, thanks. So David Omick, another expert on this topic, asks, are you aware of any species of halophytes that can thrive in a contained washwater type urine containment planter?
Yes, I think in one of our slides I listed a few of them. But when you search for these plants, you are going to be searching for excretive halophytes, ion accumulating and excretive halophytes. These are plants, the local plant, for example, which is the salt bush plant. That's a good one for the Midwest, for the West, because they're everywhere. You can get them for free, I guess. But also some of the larger plants like Tamarix or Amosissa. These are plants that basically cause trouble in some areas, but are great ways to mine the salt. If I have a separate list, if somebody wants to email me for that list, I'll be pleased to send it to them.
Okay, I might add to that we actually have someone in our book who changed his diet for his landscape, for his garden. He's a doctor who cut salt out so that his plants would be happier. And we also have experimented with some salt filters, so I think we've made some progress there, but that's for another discussion.
Great. I think I'll actually skip down to Sina's question because it's also related to halophytes. So she asks, has yerba mansa, which I guess is a native halophyte, probably here in Arizona, ever been used to pull salt from urine diversion systems?
Not to my knowledge, but once again, if there are local halophytes, it's not just a halophyte. Halophytes are plants that love being in salt. They don't necessarily bring the salt out of the system, so you have to be a little careful. It's not just a halophyte, and I don't know that particular species, but it's the ion accumulating in excretive halophytes that bring the ions together as salt in their leaves, so you can remove them. Otherwise, you just have a happy plant, and you keep accumulating salt in the bed.
Great, thank you. And Lisa asks if the two of you can speak to the pros and cons of using urine directly in the landscape versus storing for 6 months.
You could answer that one, Dave.
Well, of course you can use it directly. I mean, if you're not, for example, if for your own use and your family's use, here's something that's true, you're not going to catch any diseases that you don't already have. The problem is when you start bringing guests in from different places, or if it's a public facility, then you have to be careful. And that's the time when you basically want to store it long enough to kill the pathogens and provide it a safe use. Now, one of the things that will happen is the urine will quickly convert from some of the happier compounds to ammonia, and in some cases ammonia is toxic to plants, so it will need further use after it's been stored. The nutrients that are immediately in urine are large organic molecules, and those molecules will quickly decompose in healthy soils.
All right, and then I believe this is actually getting back to Sina's question about halophytes, but Lisa asks a follow-up on that answer. Are you disposing of the leaves with salt?
Yes, that's what you do. And in some cases, it's interesting because some of our people have been known to actually feed the leaves to animals that need salt, sort of consider it as a salt lick, if you will. These are valuable nutrients to animals and humans too. We all need sodium and we need chloride ions, and we can get them directly through the leaves of the plant itself. So there are good opportunities for using it as fodder for plants, for animals and chickens, if you will. They need it. Maybe not too much of it. They have to be careful.
Excellent. So Dave asks a really good question, I think. Is there concern about excreted prescription drugs in urine contaminating your garden?
The answer is yes and no. Not so much in your garden with your particular pharmaceuticals, if you will, because you're moving them through your own system. But surprisingly enough, it's a really big deal in wastewater treatment plants. Increasingly large communities that are focused on water quality, when they inject wastewater back into the drinking water supply, which is now happening in California, the anxiety over these types of pharmaceuticals is very high. And there's not a lot of data yet in terms of how they're managed. And I would suggest that research needs to be done. I know it's being done in a large scale, but I don't know if it's being done on a small scale, like for gardens. But you can count on excreting the chemistry that you ingest.
What we have seen is some studies that show that hormone gets pulled apart, gets disseminated in a more robust biological system than the wastewater treatment plant, which is a biological system. So your planted system has a lot more complexity to it and more processes and players who can take apart what nature put together, take apart that hormone. We had another study that we cited in our first book showing that antibiotics did not seem to harm the composting toilet contents. And then as far as heart medicines and other medicines, it's kind of a mystery. It's all going to go somewhere. And ideally, a complex system will dissimulate what was put together. And or you can think of it as someone said to me out here in California as it relates to wastewater reuse. What they're finding most in wastewater discharge is lithium and Viagra, and a lot of guys are okay with that.
Great, thank you. Odessa asks, can you discuss what happens in the composting process when you apply urine directly to it?
Again, let's speak to the issue of good composting. What we try to achieve in making a composting system is a relationship between available nitrogen and available carbon at about 25 to 1. 25 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. So if you understand the CN of urine, which is about 0.8, you can add it to the organic matter in such a way as you raise the CN ratio so that you have a good compost at the end. The microbial community, to dissimulate the organic matter, also needs nitrogen. We found, for example, in our early days, when we just had sort of gray water gardens, what would happen is the organic components, this greases and soaps and oils, wouldn't break down because it didn't have enough nitrogen. So when we added back, even just generally urea fertilizer or urine, we actually were able to start to manage the process. So the key here is the proper mixture. There are ways to do the calculations, and again, if you send me that question, I can send you how we calculated, for example, the CN ratio of gray water, how much urine really needed to be added in order to bring it up to a CN of 25.
Okay. Catlow's question is a little bit long, so you may want to follow along with me over in the chat box, and very relevant for communities in the Southwest, I think. So for central wastewater systems for larger communities, what options exist for dealing with nitrogen when water conservation in the community is reducing the volume of water to the treatment facility, and therefore making it difficult to keep retention times as necessary? I don't know which one of you wants to take a stab at that. I'll let David do that, but there are different facets to it.
The issue of reducing the volume of water in wastewater is really important because it changes the dynamics of it completely. The good news is that in a regular treatment facility, there's such a significant amount of carbon that goes into it, greases, oils, soaps, other organic matter that goes down the drain, that they are quickly combined so that you wind up with a transformation in the system. For example, I'll just do this quickly. We excrete these large molecules such as urea. As it goes down the pipes in the homes on its way to the treatment plant, there are bacteria that live in those pipes and feed on those large molecules. And by the time it gets to the treatment plant, it arrives as ammonia. Now, in a treatment plant, usually the first phase is aerobic. That is to say, air is mixed with the wastewater to encourage aerobic bacteria. And from a nitrogen cycle point of view, the one that comes first is called nitrous amonis. The nitrous amonis will use the ammonia as food, and it will oxidize it, and it will make, of course, more bacteria, makes heat, water vapor. You can't usually see that, the heat and water vapor, but it does, because these are aerobes like you and I. But it excretes a nitrite, NO2. So it takes NH3, oxidizes it, and its metabolism to NO2. And living close behind and in commensal relationship with the nitrous amonis is called a nitrobacter. This organism takes the NO2 and metabolizes it, oxidizes it, and turns it into nitrate, NO3. NO3, nitrate, is the kind of stuff that you see in fertilizer. So it can grow plants. So it's all still there. It's not physically removed. But in a solar aquatic system, what we do is we take the nitrate and we go and put it into an anoxic subsurface flow constructed wetland. And anaerobic bacteria take the nitrate and use it as their energy source. And what they do is they convert it as their energy source, and they release the nitrogen as gas. So now it's gone. So you go through a phase of an aerobic phase of conversion to nitrate, and then an anaerobic phase of denitrifying it and turning it into nitrogen gas. And many of the other larger systems are using similar technologies. Of course, we do it ecologically. I hope that answers the question.
I think it does. Thank you. So we only have about 5 minutes left here, and I don't see any other questions. I actually had one general question for the two of you, which is just related to our audience here, most of whom I believe are in Tucson and Phoenix. And so just wanted to ask if there are any final considerations or thoughts you have for doing this in really arid environments, places that get 12 inches of rain or less per year, if there might be any special considerations or problems special to this environment that you have encountered.
I don't think there's anything specific. I mean, you clearly are bereft of water, so you have to be careful about that. The urine, as we produce it, is quite strong, and it needs to be mixed with water or gray water. So instead of looking to use potable water as the mixing agent, use gray water, because that's also a waste that could be reconstituted when it's combined with urine. And then you still create this relationship of at least an 8-to-1 ratio, and then apply it as you would to subsurface. We always think it's a good idea to apply urine and gray water subsurface so that the microorganisms have the best opportunity to use them, but also they're not able to be handled by children and animals. So subsurface application, I think, is a better one, not just for your location, but for other locations. So basically use the gray water and don't use the potable water.
Great, and we had, thank you for addressing that specific concern. And we had one more question come in from Pedro, who asks if you can talk about using wood ash in composting. He's heard from different sources that it is not the best additive to soil.
Dave, you could take that one too.
Okay.
And I think actually, sorry, Dave, to interrupt you, that's probably specifically for desert soil.
Okay. It's actually specific to just about any soils. When you burn wood, what you do is you create a potassium compound. So you have, this is why it's called pot ash. And in fact, one of the good uses of that kind of thing is to make soap. You can actually sort of boil the ash long enough, and so that you make potassium hydroxide, and when you mix that with oils, you make liquid soaps. But when you compost it, you have to do it carefully, because yeah, you would like to have that potassium, but you don't want to have so much that it actually kills the microorganisms, because you can lower the pH significantly with these wood ash compounds and kill the very organisms that in a composting pile that do the work. In fact, in some countries they actually use wood ash as a cover for fecal matter, because it kills the microorganisms and it stabilizes, prevents the decomposition of feces. Not a good thing. And if it prevents decomposition, your composting system isn't going to work very well at all. Use it sparingly, A little potassium is good for the mix, but too much is a bad thing.
Our slide that shows a composter with our claim that's one of the ways to manage urine is actually my composter here, but I'm just missing my stock compost photo for the urine. That one shows a big dousing of wood ash on top only because I have a California pine here. So mostly I'm trying to break down the acidity of the pine, but usually we're not using so much wood ash for the reasons Dave just discussed.
All right, great. Well, I want to thank you both so much for participating in this and taking the time to do the planning that goes into it. And also thank all of you who joined us out there on the internet. Thank you for spending your afternoon learning about this topic. Our final webinar in this series, just a reminder, will be on extreme composting around the world, and it's on Thursday, February 21st from 9 to 10 a.m. We have a presenter from India, so that's the reason for the time difference there. She'll actually be in India presenting. Also a reminder that a recording of this webinar, if you want to come back and reference it or send it to anyone else, will be available on our website, watershedmg.org/soil stewards within 24 hours. So thank you very much to David and Carol and to all of you for joining us, and we will be signing off.
Thanks all.